Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the June 2026 edition of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin, and with Emily Green from Walker Family Law. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself for those who haven't met you before?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Emily. I work at Walker Family Law. I'm in the divorce and finance team. Also do some children work. Been there for the last 3 years now.
Perfect, thank you very much. And as I said, I'm Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I work in conjunction with Walker Family Law to provide these webinars as an extra resource on top of the brilliant legal work that Walker Family Law do. And we hope to be able to give you guidance and fresh ideas for how you can cope better through the divorce process and beyond. And today we're going to talk about the Form E. The Form E is a big form that you have to fill in at the start of the divorce process. And I know that from talking to lots of my clients, it can be quite an overwhelming form. It's quite big. It seems very scary. And lots of people take quite a lot of time to fill it in. And sometimes people procrastinate, they delay. It's a huge, chunky task. So we thought we would break it down a bit today, and give you some practical and emotional tips to help you get it done. So first of all, I thought we'd start off with some basics, Emily.
Mhm.
So could you just explain to us what is a Form E? What is it all about?
Mhm. So a Form E is a comprehensive financial statement that we use. It's used to outline each party's assets, income, debts, and financial needs, so that a fair settlement can be calculated and agreed upon. It's what we start off with in the proceedings, whether it's on a voluntary basis or whether we are in issue court proceedings. We tend to follow the same precedent and use that form because it's very informative. It gives you all the information that you need to make an informed decision moving forward. So whilst it is a very lengthy document and it is very frightening, and I think it's the form that most scares my clients when they first see it, it is very important that we start things out on the right footing, so that we are aware of what is exactly in each case.
Brilliant. And could you just explain, and you mentioned voluntary disclosure and also then court order disclosure. What's the difference, just for those people watching who perhaps are not in the process yet and just wondering what that means?
So when a client comes to see me, generally they will say, I want to do things amicably and I want to try and resolve things as quickly and as cost-free as I can with my ex-partner. As a starting point, we say, okay, well, we'll look at this on a voluntary basis, i.e. Will both of you agree to complete this form of your own free will? And will you produce all the financial documentation we need in order to be able to give you the best advice we can in terms of what is a fair financial settlement? You're doing it voluntarily, as the word sounds, so you're not under any court order to do it, but it does allow you to provide the right information that we need at the outset. There's no timeline to do that, so we're not under any court ordered timeline. We agree a way forward, so it's the most amicable way of doing things, as opposed to in a situation whereby perhaps you've tried the voluntary process first and the other party isn't engaging or won't give you the information that you need. And then you get to a stage where you have no choice but to issue court proceedings in order to get that information and make it available to you. So in those cases, unfortunately, sometimes we do have to issue court proceedings in order to get the information that we need through.
Thank you. Go on.
I was just going to say, once we do that, you are then court ordered. So the court will set a timetable. Once that timetable is then in place, both parties are under an obligation to comply with that court timetable, and it will give you a date. You will exchange Form Es by this date. That isn't then a voluntary process. You're court ordered. You have to comply with that direction of the court, or there can be cost penalties if you fail to do so.
Lovely, thank you very much. I know that when we look at Form E and we talk about Form E, and people will probably have Googled Form E and to find out more about it. And lots of the information talks about full and frank disclosure. And what does that actually mean? What kind of things must be involved and included?
So it's full and frank disclosure is a legal obligation. You have to provide complete, honest, and documented details of your financial circumstances. So that includes income, assets, liabilities, and future income needs. So for instance, in the Form E, you have to give evidence as to what a matrimonial home is worth. We would do that by either giving 3 estate agent valuations and trying to agree on what the sort of the average of those 3 valuations would be. So that's for the purposes of negotiations. So the average of those 3 valuations can be used if it's done by agreement. If the parties can't reach an agreement, then we would have to instruct an expert such as a RICS surveyor who would prepare a report, and that report would detail what the exact figure and valuation for that property would be. Other examples would be pension assets. So both parties are under an obligation to disclose details of all pensions that they hold. And we would need what is known as the CETV value, so the cash equivalent transfer value on those pensions. And it can be multiple pensions for different people. Again, in those circumstances, sometimes we need what we call a PODE report, which is an expert, which provides expert information in terms of what the valuations of those pensions were and what would be needed to equalise those pensions and retirements, for instance. So there's lots of different things that we would need as part of that Form E process, and it's quite detailed information, and it can be really overwhelming for clients who sometimes don't even know where the information is or how to find it, or have never had access to it before because that was the way the marriage was set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads me right nicely into another question, which would be, what if I can't get hold of all the documents that I need? It might be that somebody doesn't know the passwords, or like you say, their ex-partner has always dealt with that kind of stuff. What if I just can't get hold of all the documents that I need to fit in?
So, for instance, if it's a password issue and the assets held in your sole name, you can contact the company and you can reset the password. Those types of situations are quite easy to resolve. If you have a different situation where, for instance, the property's in your ex-partner's sole name and the mortgage is in his sole name, and you can't access that information because you're not entitled to it through contacting the company directly, what we would do in those circumstances is give the best information we have available and say, well, the property's in the other party's name, we think the mortgage is about this figure, but what will happen is when we exchange those Form E's, that documentation will have to come through. So the other party will have to produce the documentation to do with the mortgage redemption statement to give the value of the outstanding mortgage. So even if you don't know all of the information, it might be likely that it will come through some stage in the future in any event when we exchange the Form E's. Or if, for instance, you have pensions, which some people do, lots of different pensions from different employments, and you've moved house and you've lost track and you're not sure, then there's certain websites that you can go to, or there's an address that you can write to request information. And obviously your solicitor can guide you through the process. If you get stuck, you're not sure, or you don't know how to access the information available. So we will guide you through each stage of those processes.
Brilliant. And I think you mentioned a couple of websites as well in relation to pension when we were talking, and we can make sure that we put those links perhaps in the YouTube video to this. But just very briefly, what are the websites that you were recommending to me?
So there's 2 websites. There's www.gov.uk/find-pensions/ contact details. So if you, for instance, you've got a pension with Aviva, but you're not sure of the details, for instance, you can use a website to find out what those specific details are. If you don't have any information at all and think, oh, well, 20 years ago I worked for a company, but I can't even remember the name of the pension provider, you can do a tracing service, and that one is www.pensiontracingservice.com. So there's 2 websites that you can use in order to find and try and access the information you need. Or there's also an address at the Pension Scheme Registry, which again we can log on the YouTube. So you can write to that company and say, this is as much detail as I can remember. Can you please do a search for me and see what pensions are in my name? And obviously those companies, all the online services, will do their best to assist you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Because I know that I often have clients who are really confused by how to find that information and how to look back 25 years and find information that they've forgotten about. I know it myself. I used to be a teacher and no idea how to find that. Anyway, so other questions. What happens once you've filled in this big form? You've got all the information that you needed. You've filled it in. Sometimes it takes weeks, and sometimes some people it takes months. What's the next step after you filled it in?
So once we get to the stage where it's confirmed that both parties have completed and signed the document, it has to be signed on a statement of truth, so it has to be complete and accurate and honest. Once we get to that stage, we will contact the other party and say, we're now ready and we would like to exchange. So what we do then is we agree a date, and what will happen is there'll be a simultaneous exchange of those documents, either between solicitors, or if there's a litigant in person, we would do it directly with that person, but it would be simultaneously. So we agree on Friday at 4 that we will exchange this information, and it goes across at that time that's agreed. Once that's done, we have both formies and we know what is effectively in the matrimonial pot. At that stage, we look through the evidence that's been provided by the other party and we see if there's anything that's missing that we think, okay, well, I'm sure they had a policy with Aviva at this point and I can't see that it's disclosed, or I think they had a pension. I remember seeing a bit of paperwork lying around somewhere that said something to do with a pension with Aviva. We ask questions on the Form E. So anything that doesn't look right, any information that's missing, or any assets that we feel haven't been disclosed, the questionnaire is the point that we then raise those. So that would be the next step after the Form E has been exchanged.
Brilliant. So a question that I often get asked by my clients, or something that they're worrying about, is making sure that they fill in the Form E correctly, and not wanting to make a mistake on it. What advice would you give to a client who is in that situation? You know, that they're really worried, they want to get it 100% perfect, 100% right before they hand it to you. What would you say?
I mean, I always say to my clients, fill it in the best you can. You have to give the best, honest, disclose as much information as you can. If it's too much, then your solicitor will tell you that it's too much and we don't need to give perhaps so much information. So we're required to give 12 months worth of bank statements. For instance, if they give me 2 years, I'm going to say, well, we only need to give 12 months. So I will hold all of the statements on my file, but I would only disclose the last 12 months because that's all we're required to do under the form. It's very difficult sometimes because you can't always find the information that you need. So sometimes you get to the stage where you have to give the best information that's available to you at that point in time. There's an ongoing duty, though, after you've exchanged Form Es. So if something comes to light after that date of exchange, what you would then do is update the information. So there's an ongoing duty to update and disclose as the proceedings continue, whether that's voluntary or whether that's in court proceedings. So if something appears at a later stage to be wrong and it was genuinely wrong and you just didn't know, we would simply update it. As soon as it becomes available to us, we would disclose that to the other side.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then another question that I hear quite often too is, while we're filling these forms in, and appreciate it takes time, and then we go into negotiations potentially, should I keep spending as normal, or should I cut my spending? Should I increase my spending? How should I be approaching what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis?
So I would say keep it stable. So what you've always done, stick to those arrangements. Don't go out and spend extravagantly. Don't go and book any extravagant holidays. Spend lots of money on items that you wouldn't normally spend money on. So the standard of living should be maintained. Equally, I wouldn't restrict yourself to the extent that you're spending £10 a week on food, for instance, if you spent £50 on food previously. So try and keep things as consistent and as normal as you possibly can. There will be some obvious changes that will happen when two parties separate and there's two different households. There will be differences, but try not to get hung up on spending too much or too little. Just try and maintain a consistent balance of what the standard of living has always been.
Yeah, and what then should somebody do if they're in a situation where they are doing exactly what you've described, and they're maintaining their standard of living as it always was? But and I've seen this happen too. You know, their ex starts spending a lot of money. Perhaps they've got a new partner. Perhaps they're booking, like you say, extravagant holidays. Perhaps they are spending on, I don't know, luxury items. What then?
We would raise that in the questionnaire as to whether it's a reasonable expenditure or whether it is over the top in terms of what the standard of living has been previously. You can have things like add back arguments, but The difficulty with that back arguments is that the threshold is extremely high. So if you have somebody that's perhaps spending an extra £100 or £200 a month on meals out, you're unlikely to be successful with any add back argument. If you have a situation whereby somebody has gambled £50,000 away, and you can see from the disclosure that that money has been spent on their sole purpose, and it's something that is wanton and reckless, then ultimately you can document that and you can have an add back argument before the court. As I say, they are very rare arguments, and if it's just sort of minimal, everyday, slightly more extravagant than normal spending, we could add that up and we could account for it in the overall settlement. But the add back arguments have to be quite extreme in order to be successful. But I can understand, and I have a lot of clients that say this, my husband or my wife has just gone absolutely crazy. They're on their third holiday this year. We never did that. I don't know what's going on. All this money is being dissipated, and we have needs, and we have to find 2 households now and survive moving forward for the children. So it is certainly something that is an issue in a financial separation situation. We're live to the issue, and we can deal with that as the case progresses.
Thank you very much. That's reassuring. And I think, what I will say to my clients is, you need to take individual advice on this. Obviously, your situation may be different to somebody else's situation, so always take individual advice on anything like that. And what you've just been talking about actually has raised something else as well, which is all the emotions around it for me. When you're in a situation where you're watching, perhaps your ex has got a new partner and they are spending a bit more money going out to dinner and doing things with that person, brings up all kinds of emotions. Anger, a lot of the time. Why should I be cutting back perhaps, or feel that I'm having to cut back while you're off going out with your new partner? Or why should I be filling this form in and have to do this when you're the person who's caused the divorce? Or sometimes, why am I spending hours doing this when the other person is not even cooperating and doesn't seem to be? And there's lots of really strong emotions can come up around this forming. I think sometimes that's partly what makes it so difficult. For many people, it brings up that anger. So for some people, it brings up a really sharp sense of fear. Writing all this down and knowing that it's all about what the future is going to look like can be really frightening for many people, I think. Or perhaps some people are feeling a sense of shame around it, in that perhaps they weren't the person who had a real handle on the finances, and they suddenly realised how little they understood about it or hadn't been involved. And clients often tell me that they feel a bit stupid, or they feel a bit underconfident. But I'm sure you see this all the time too, and it's you are not abnormal for finding yourself in this situation at all. And those feelings are really, really normal.
I think it's entirely normal as well for one person to take the lead on finances. In most situations I see with clients coming in, it's very rarely equal that we both manage the finances together. There's always somebody that's just slightly stronger, or perhaps a lot stronger at dealing with financial matters and budgeting and managing. And actually, if we think about our everyday lives, it's time consuming, it's complex, it takes quite a lot of mental, it's mental pressure, isn't it, having to deal on a day-to-day basis with all those financial aspects. And some people just don't feel like they've got the ability to deal with that, and they're quite happy to leave it to the other person. And I would say in those situations, for people that do come in who are underconfident and who don't know what their financial circumstances are, that's why we're there. That's why we're there, to assist, to help, to find out the information that they need in order to be able to make those informed choices, so that they are fully equipped for the future with the best fairest financial settlement that they can get. So it's really giving a lot of emotional support along the process as well. And I do feel like the For Me is the one document right at the beginning where they think, God, this is real now. This is real. And I now have to proceed perhaps down a route I didn't want to go down through my own choice. And it's something that I don't feel equipped to deal with. But that is why you then get legal representation, because that's our job. That's what we're there to do, to support and assist you through the process.
No, I think that's absolutely right. For many of the clients that I work with, the For Me is the thing that makes the divorce really real. And it's also, for many people, it's perhaps one step closer to something that they really don't want to happen. For example, they might have received advice that they are going to need to sell a family home,
Mm.
and filling in this form is one step closer to
Yeah.
that outcome, which people don't necessarily want.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I think also people feel vulnerable.
Hmm.
They feel vulnerable that the future feels very uncertain.
Hmm.
It's like, what if I don't have enough after
Hmm.
this?
Hmm.
What if I have to give up all sorts of things? What if I have to move to an area that I
Mm.
really don't like? And all these
Yeah.
fears and concerns are so normal, but
Mm.
they can lead to people avoiding
Yeah.
filling in this form, which is so important. And I think
Mm.
that's the beauty of where we work together. I work with people
Mhm.
around those emotions,
Yeah.
and you work with people around the legal aspects of filling in that form and what it means in terms of the legal process.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, if you're watching this and you are feeling really fearful, or you're feeling really afraid of what the future perhaps might look like, or it's feeling like this has come really real with this, please reach out for support, either to somebody like me or a therapist, or even talk to your friends and family. Um, the one thing I always say to people is, this form, although it's scary, it will give you clarity.
Hmm.
It will help you get another step closer to clarity. And the antidote to overwhelm, I believe, is clarity. So you might find a gap, but once you know what that gap is, you can then start to think of ways to fill it. You might take some financial advice, for example, and work out how you can fill any gap that may well be there. But I think what I really want to say to people listening is, often people avoid the forming not because they're lazy or disorganized, um, or because they just don't want to, but sometimes it's because it feels really scary. It feels very final. And they're going through a grieving process at the same time as having to do this really tricky form. And for some people, it's their brain protecting them from filling in a form that's going to lead to a place that they don't really want to go. Um, but as we were saying when we were preparing for this, ultimately it is a form that has to be filled in, because if it isn't filled in, then the court can get involved, can't they? And I remember just at the beginning you were saying, that the court can impose sanctions.
Hmm.
So what happens if you don't fill this form in, if you procrastinate for a really long time and you
Hmm.
don't manage to get it done? What
Hmm.
actually happens?
So if you're in court proceedings, the other party could ask for a penal notice to be attached to an order, which means that you have to comply with the order. If you then still fail to comply, the court can impose a cost consequence against you. So it's delaying the inevitable, and it's actually making life harder. So anybody that come to me in that sort of situation and said, I've got this court order, I haven't filled it in, I haven't filled in for me, I haven't complied with the timetable, my advice would be, let's get on and let's do it as quickly as we can, one page at a time. That's all I need somebody to do, is just one page at a time. If you just focus, because 20 something pages is too overwhelming,
Yeah.
let's just do one thing a day, because splitting things down into more manageable chunks often leads to people thinking, okay, well, I can do that one thing today, but I can't do everything that you've asked me in one go because it's just too much, and this is why I've been avoiding it for this long. I think the point to realise, though, is if you're in court proceedings, you can't ignore it. It isn't something that can just be sort of put into a drawer and closed, and actually you're making your life far harder to do things that way. If you're in a voluntary process, then obviously nobody can make you do anything that you don't want to do, but the likelihood is that at some stage court proceedings would be issued. And obviously you don't want to do that unless you absolutely have to. Court is the absolute last resort. So to avoid any court application, I would always encourage people to fill it in on a voluntary basis. Let's get the disclosure done. Let's get the information that we need available, and then we can start to look at possible outcomes, which may or may not be exactly what you hoped. I mean, yes, you say about clarity, but clarity is also being realistic in terms of, you have gone from a two household income with joint assets, and you are going to be going to potentially a single income household with half of those assets. So there is going to be a reduction in standard of living. There always is at the time of separation. But does it mean that the world's going to end and that you're not going to be able to house yourself? Possibly not, no. There's lots of different options that are available, and we can look at all of those options once we know what that full disclosure is. I think avoiding the inevitable just really keeps that fear alive and ticking and present, whereas actually dealing with the issues and sitting down and thinking, okay, well, that perhaps isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I was really worried that I was going to have to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, the reality is that I'm not. And I wish I filled in the form sooner, because I would have saved myself all this anxiety and worry. So it's dealing with things in a manageable way, in chunks that you can cope with. But it has to be done, is the sort of voice I would echo.
Yeah, it's I was talking with a client about the For Me just last week, actually. We were talking about the joke about how you eat an elephant. So how do you eat an elephant? One chunk at a time. And I think the For Me is very much like that, one chunk at a time. So you might say, you know, today I'm going to print my bank account statements. Tomorrow I'm going to check my pension providers. Then I'm going to request the details. You know, just do a small little bit every day. The other mistake that I sometimes see people do is leaving it to the last minute. So they've got a deadline of, I don't know, a month's time or 6 weeks' time. And they put it off and put it off and put it off. And then suddenly they've only got a weekend. And actually,
or they'll send it the day before.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
and that's going to be much more expensive.
Yeah, so sometimes we'll get it the day before it's due to be filed, which does lead to a certain amount of panic, I will admit, because it's quite a lengthy form. You have to go through the form, you have to make sure it's dealt with correctly, you have to make sure you've got all the disclosure documents you need. You know, having that information the day before really doesn't give you any room for error. You have to be absolutely certain and concrete that what you're giving is accurate at that stage. I mean, I would certainly ask for documents such as this at least a week before, as a minimum, longer if possible, because the more time you give, the more you can iron out any issues that there are. If you get to the stage where you get it the day before and you need to file by tomorrow, you're really given a limited opportunity then to make any alterations that you need to in time for the court deadline. And yes, can we file it or agree it slightly later? We can, but again, it's just adding cost to something that doesn't need to be there. So I would say get it a good week before as a minimum, but longer if you can. And the court will give a good 6-week timetable for filing, so you have plenty of time. And usually by the time the timetable's in place, you've known for quite some months before that this is going to be coming as well. So time is there and it is available, and it's not a let's do this tomorrow. It is, you are given sort of a decent amount of time to gather the information that you need.
Yeah. So I think, the advice is one chunk at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Start collecting your documentation really early. Start filling it in a page at a time, little bit by little bit by little bit.
I mean, I say at the first appointment, here's the For Me, start filling it in now, because we will need it at some stage. So as early as possible, I send it out, which just gives my clients, as much time as I possibly can, even if they're just reading it at that stage, to just familiarise themselves with what is going to be required, so that it's not a complete shock when it comes through. So yeah, little and often, and get the For Me sort of in your brain and sort of an overview understood as early as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think the other thing that sometimes people don't look at when they're thinking about the For Me, because it's so overwhelming, is that actually when you do it properly and you do it stage by stage by stage, gives you a really good grounding for the negotiation part of the process. So if you do your For Me, over time, piece by piece by piece, you'll have a really good understanding of what's there when you get to that negotiation process. And I would say always speak to, a therapist or somebody to help you if the feelings are so overwhelming that you're finding it impossible to even start. Ask for some help at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
We thought we'd also talk about some common fears and what if scenarios and what might happen in those. So the first one, which I hear quite a lot, is what if my ex doesn't complete their For Me? Then what? Then we're into the realm of applying to the court, aren't we, I think?
Yeah, we are. So if we're in a voluntary process at that stage, and the information isn't becoming available, so we're trying to exchange For Me's, but we're not getting a date, or if we exchange For Me's, but the information is scattered, there's parts missing, there's assets that haven't been disclosed, we obviously ask questions on those missing parts. If we feel that the information isn't going to become available, then I think you have to get to a stage where the voluntary process is there to assist and it's to try and reduce costs. But actually, if you spend in 6 months going back and forth and you're not achieving anything, what you're actually doing at that stage is increasing costs. So there gets to a point where you have to sort of make that decision, and you get a feel for these cases as to whether something is going to materialize or not. And I think the longer you do it, the more instinct you get. If it gets to a point where you feel, actually, I just don't think this information is going to become available, or he isn't going to disclose what he needs to do, he or she, you then have to make that informed decision. Okay, well, do I need the assistance of the court now? Because the court's the only entity that can make disclosure happen. So we as solicitors can't make somebody produce the evidence that we need. It's only the court that can assist in those circumstances, and we would ask for a formal court order for the disclosure by Form E. And then if that information doesn't become available, like I said, we could ask for a penal notice or a costs order if it still doesn't materialise.
Yeah, yeah. And on an emotional level, I remember working with a client once who's her ex-partner still didn't produce the documents, even with a court order, and there were penal notices and so on and so on. There came a point where she had to think, well, I need to stop moving this, to stop keeping on going back, because the emotional toll on her was just huge. And all the while that they were spending time on lots and lots of visits to court, the money was still being dissipated at that point. So sometimes there comes a point when you need to emotionally say, I need to walk away from this now, I think. And those cases are rare.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one. And every case sort of pivots on its own circumstances. You can carry on spending good money after bad. So if you're spending so much that it doesn't warrant what's being dissipated or what has been dissipated, you have to form a view. Is it proportionate in terms of costs to continue? And that's a legal point rather than an emotional point. But I take what you're saying, and sometimes where cases are really tricky and you have a really difficult opponent on the other side, I wouldn't be surprised if people get to a point where they say, emotionally, I just can't carry on. It's just taking too much away from me. It's not even necessarily about the financial, it's about the emotional stress that it's taking. And actually, what I need at this stage is I need a financial settlement. So whilst it might not be in that person's financial interest to say, okay, I'm going to take this offer, what they might say to me is, actually, emotionally, I've had enough and I can't do this anymore, and I want it to be over and done with, in which case that's completely their choice to make.
Yeah, and there absolutely is a decision to be made on that, I think, in some cases. Okay, so the next thing that comes up quite often is people who have a fear that their ex will hide things, or that they will manipulate the numbers in some kind of a way. What can people do in that? Obviously, you can go back with the questions if you think there's things missing, if you think there's things hidden, and then there's the cost benefit analysis to be done. But what would you say to somebody who comes and says, well, I'm sure my ex has hidden this, or they've manipulated the numbers to make it look a particular way? What can we do then?
The financial disclosure would give you the evidence in terms of the numbers. So if the numbers don't add up, you're going to be asking questions anyway, because it's not going to make sense. More tricky things are undisclosure of assets. So if they say, okay, well, I'm sure they had a pension at this point in time, but I saw some paperwork and it was lying around, or they told me, but it hasn't come through in the disclosure paperwork. We ask the questions, and we do as much as we can to trace what we think is there. What I can't do is take documents that don't belong to the party I'm representing. So if they say, okay, well, I've broken into the safe at home and I found this document, and look, my husband does have this pension, I told you he did. I can't take that document under the IMM rules, which basically means that if it's a confidential document that's in another party's name, you're not allowed to go rooting for it. You can't break passwords or hack into computers or break into safes. If the document has been just left lying around the kitchen and it's just lying somewhere and it's available to look at, the confidentiality rule is sort of lost at that point, because it's been left exposed and lying around. I still can't have the document because it's not my document to have if it's in the other party's name that I'm not representing, but they can tell me what they've seen from memory. So they can say, well, I've seen this document, he left it lying around on the kitchen table, he had £100,000 in this account, but it hasn't come out in Form E, and we can ask all sorts of questions. So if we if we have information that's sort of on a knowledge base, we can ask questions and sort of try and dig in to find the information we need. What the court can't do is make an order on assets that aren't disclosed. So if they're not in the proceedings and we haven't been able to get information on them, the court will only make a court order on assets that are in the court's perimeter. So it won't say, okay, well, just because you think he had £100,000 hidden away, there's no proof of it and we can't see it. So I'm going to make an order on this basis. If, however, later on it comes to light that somebody has failed to disclose material assets, which would have changed the financial order, you could apply back to court to have that order set aside. So there is a duty of full and frank financial disclosure. You do sign a statement of truth on it, and that's what you're told you have to do. If you lie or mislead the court, again, there can be consequences, financial cost orders further down the line, but it is obviously tricky at that point because applying to have an order set aside is obviously going to come with a cost consequence to the person that's applying as well.
Yeah, and an emotional strain as well.
Yes.
I mean, I was reading about there's a recent case, wasn't there, of the 23-year divorce where the couple had divorced and there were lots of assets that have been hidden and lies that have been told and so on. But the battle took 23 years. That's a very long time for somebody. I know that's a very extreme case, of course. But that's a very long time, isn't it, for somebody to be involved in litigation over something like this. I think there were millions and millions and millions of pounds involved in that
Generally,
case.
those high-profile cases do involve multi-million pounds, and that's why it's so tricky, because most people we see on a daily basis don't have multi-millions of pounds.
No.
It's quite rare for somebody to have a situation where they have huge amounts of wealth, but the case law reported does generally involve lots of cases which are of high net worth. So it's applying those principles to somebody that has very modest assets most of the time, and that's why the cost proportionality rule comes in. Is it proportionate to continue to argue about something that could be worth £10,000 when ultimately the costs involved are likely to exceed that? The answer is generally no.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've been talking exclusively about the Form E so far. And the other question that I get asked is, do I really have to fill this form in? Or is there something else that I could use instead? Is there another form that's shorter?
Yes. So the Form E is the best form to fill in. It's the most accurate. It discloses all of the information that we need. If a client comes to me and says, we're pretty clear of both of our financial positions and we don't want to complete the Form E, it's going to cost us a lot of money and it's going to take us a lot of time. What we can do is a more condensed schedule of assets and liabilities, and we can do more limited disclosure. So we can agree to do things on a more limited basis. But in order to reach a financial agreement, you do have to have an exact knowledge of what is in that matrimonial pot. So the easy answer is yes, we can do something at a lower level that's easier and quicker and more cost effective, but you still do need to do a limited amount of financial disclosure so that you are making an informed decision and you know that what you're doing is in your best interest to do so.
And I imagine that the cases where that would be really appropriate would be cases where both parties in the couple absolutely have full sight of everything. They're probably quite amicable. They're both able to say, yes, I know exactly what's on the table and what's in the joint pot.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of times they're coming to us with a financial agreement as well. They've already gone through that negotiation process and said, we've reached an agreement. All we want you to do is implement it. So, you're right. It is definitely where it's two people that are on an equal footing. It's where they have full knowledge of the other's financial circumstances. It's where they are usually quite amicable. It's very rare for them to be not amicable and agree to financial schedules. So there are options and they're usually discussed at the initial appointment.
Yeah, it's really helpful as well. So I think one of the other things that is often overlooked about the Form E, a lot of the webinars about it, a lot of blogs about it, and things that I've seen on, lawyers' websites and so on. It's all about how painful and how difficult Form E is. And I thought it would be quite useful for us to just spend, a few minutes thinking about actually what the benefits of the Form E are, because, there absolutely are benefits to it. You come out the other side understanding your finances fully. There may be a whole education process that you've been through around that, but you
Mhm.
should come out the other side really understanding what your finances are and what you have.
Mhm.
And so you may become much more financially informed as a
Mhm.
result of having to do this.
Mhm.
You might, of course, identify some assets that you'd forgotten about or
Mhm.
that are worth more than you thought they were.
Mhm.
For example, specific,
Mhm.
pensions, for example, you might have forgotten
Mm.
some.
I think pensions are always a sort of forgotten aspect, aren't they? We start pensions when we're younger and we pay into them and we don't really think about it too much until we get to the stage of retirement or closer to. So more often than not, I think it is the forgotten pensions. And actually, when you're going through a divorce process, actually, accumulating all this information and putting your finances in order, it's a useful exercise, like you say, educationally, because you sort of work out what you've got and where. And once you've been through this process, you've got an end result, and then what is yours.
Mm,
So you've almost sort of tidied up, cleaned up, if you
yeah.
like, and worked out where everything is, rather than waiting till you come to retirement age and think, oh God, I had about 10 pensions and I can't remember where they are, and you've got all that stress at the end. So
Mm,
educationally it can be really useful. Sometimes as well you think, oh well, I didn't realize that was in the pot, and actually that was much better than I thought, or I didn't realize the pension was that value, and actually I've got more options available to me now because there is more there and it is more available. But I can understand the fear factor, and I don't think if I started to explain the benefits at an initial appointment of filling in a form, anybody's going to really think, "Oh, great! I'm glad you told me that." It's definitely the fear that I see more often than
yeah.
not, rather than
Yeah.
anything
No, I
else.
think if you start to talk about benefits in the first
Yeah,
section, in the first session, then
no,
I suspect there'll be some other ruder words going
yeah,
through your clients' heads.
I
Yeah.
think so.
But from where I'm sitting here, having worked with lots of clients through
Mhm,
this process, it really can be ultimately
mhm,
something that benefits you in the long
mhm,
term. Having that clarity, being able to negotiate from a position of knowledge,
mhm,
um, which enables you to feel more in control through the
mhm,
process
mhm,
and then beyond it. And I suppose I'll hold on to that for all of our clients as a piece of knowledge
mhm.
that many times you only really realise afterwards.
Afterwards, yeah. This is
Yeah,
the realization at the end, I would say, when the proceedings are concluded, that you look back and think, okay, well, I'm glad I did that because I now know what I didn't know before. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think you can look back and think, oh, that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever
Mm,
had to do, and I did it.
mhm.
Um, so, unless there is anything else that you think is really important for us to raise, I think we've covered most of
Yeah,
the things that we were preparing to
yeah.
talk about.
Yeah, I mean, all I would say is that I've never had anybody that's never completed a for me. So if I've had lots of people that have struggled, I've had lots of people that have been overwhelmed, had lots of people that are scared, I've had lots of people that have been resistant. But we've always got there in the end. So I think anybody
Yeah.
that's watching this that thinks, God, I'm never going to be able to do this, or oh my God, this is way beyond my capabilities, to know that I've never come across in 20 years anybody that hasn't been able to complete a for me shows that it's perfectly possible and doable. So I
Mm.
would just sort of leave with that snippet saying, it is a complicated form, it is a time consuming form, but it is doable and you can do it.
I think that's a perfect way to end.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Emily,
Right.
and thank you very much, everybody, for watching. And we will see you in July for the next Divorce Support Club. Thank you very much for watching.